Huh?
Catch me outside, how about that?
Catch you outside?
Dr. Phil dominated daytime TV for 2 decades, then vanished almost overnight. What exactly happened? Today, we are going to expose the dark side of Dr. Phil. But before we begin, hit that subscribe button because what you are about to see will change your perception of one of the biggest TV shows in history. Background. Most people think that Dr. Phil's story begins with daytime television and the viral moments, but the reality is way more calculated than that. It reveals all he went through to build his empire. Phil McGraw didn't come up through Hollywood doors or even entertainment industry connections. Rather, he founded it in Texas as a psychologist and trial consultant while building a company called Courtroom Sciences. This company helped attorneys and defendants prepare for high-stakes litigation. He even taught people how to present themselves, read juries, and strategically navigate the legal system properly. Finally, in 1996, the Texas cattleman sued Oprah Winfrey over comments she made about beef safety on her show. The lawsuit was a huge deal because, let's be real, Oprah Winfrey is not a small name. Hundreds of millions of dollars were at stake, and it was all over the media. Oprah needed someone who could help her team understand jury psychology and courtroom dynamics. Then she called Phil McGraw, and that one phone call changed everything.
Has anybody ever told you that you happen to look like a good friend of mine?
After Oprah won the case, she was so impressed with Phil's presence, communication styles, and his ability to break down complex psychological concepts into small sound bites that she wanted him on her show. It wasn't as a one-time expert, but regularly she saw something in him that translated perfectly to television. It was the ability to be authoritative without being too complex with his world or being cruel. He was able to deliver tough love that most people would take without making it personal. Even when his words weren't particularly therapeutic, the way he delivered his lines did the job perfectly. It was in 2002 that Phil got his own show with Oprah's production company backing him. The launch was absolutely massive, and it was the highest-rated talk show debut in television history at that point. It was consistently pulling 5 million viewers per episode in the first season. Within the first 3 years, the show was generating tons of millions of dollars annually, which turned Phil McGraw into a multimedia brand worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But here is what he made. He found people in crisis, put them on national TV, and delivered blunt, common-sense advice in a commanding voice while framing everything as cutting through excuses to reach reality. Americans ate it up. The show even got 31 Daytime Emmy nominations over its run, and that made Dr. Phil a household name that was basically no-nonsense psychology. But here's what most people never knew. Phil McGraw hasn't held an active psychology license since 2006, but he practiced clinical psychology until 1990. He let his license expire for the entire duration of his television career. All the years he presented himself as Dr. Phil and gave what looked like psychological advice to millions. He wasn't actually licensed to practice psychology in any of the states. His show Legal Disclaimers also made it clear, if you're bothered to ever read them, the show doesn't provide therapy. Phil isn't acting as a psychologist, and guests aren't even patients. But the average viewer didn't go through those changes. They saw Dr. Phil in the title and assumed that they were watching an actual psychological treatment happening in real time on television. While Dr. Phil was going to the highest highs of his career, he didn't know the downfall was coming. Entertainment and ethics. The main issue really started becoming public around 2016, but the gap between what the show once claimed and what it actually was became impossible to ignore. Critics even argued those concerns for years, but the mainstream media and public largely gave Dr. Phil a pass because his show was so popular. However, then came the Shelley Duvall interview, and suddenly the shield that was once invisible started cracking.
I show up to the studios and I'm sober, and then they pull me into my dressing room. There was 2 liters of vodka, being unsupervised by my parents.
If you haven't watched the show, Shelley Duvall was an actress known for roles in films like The Shining. One day, she appeared on Dr. Phil, clearly struggling with serious mental health issues. The interview was just straight up uncomfortable to watch. Duvall talked about delusional beliefs and appeared disconnected from reality itself. She was obviously in a vulnerable psychological state. Critics and mental health professionals exploded with their outrage. They accused Phil of exploiting someone who was clearly unwell for being on television, in front of millions of people. Vivian Kubrick, the daughter of director Stanley Kubrick, publicly called Phil out as well, saying that he was shamelessly exploiting Duvall's vulnerable condition. There were even mental health advocates who pointed out that aiding someone experiencing serious mental delusions on national TV without a proper therapeutic context to follow up was just indefensible.
He won on Survivor, but now
I've never talked to a guest that was closer to death.
he's losing a battle with alcohol.
The backlash was intense and went on for a long time. People on social media started demanding his license to be revoked, seemingly unaware that he hadn't even gotten one for a decade. Critics accused him of violating basic therapeutic ethics, though technically, he wasn't bound by any of those contracts because he wasn't even a functioning licensed therapist. What did Phil do to defend himself? Well, nothing. It was just silence. There was no public apology, no acknowledgement that maybe broadcasting someone's serious mental health crisis to millions wasn't the most responsible choice. The show just moved on to the next episode, the next crisis, and the next viral moment. That pattern was ongoing. It exploited vulnerable people for content, faced criticism, ignored it, and repeated. However, this would later expose Dr. Phil to a whole other level. But before we cover that, if you want more videos where we expose the darkest sides of Hollywood and celebrities, do give us a sub. The Investigation.
I show up to the studios and I'm sober. There was 2 liters of vodka and like some Red Bulls and orange juice and stuff like that. You know, being unsupervised by my parents, I drank the entire bottle. And then at some point somebody gave me a Xanax.
In 2017, a Stat News investigation aired something that detonated Phil's carefully cultivated reputation. There were former guests who came forward with stories that painted the truth and made Dr. Phil look really bad. Multiple guests who had appeared on his episode came forward, dealing with addiction, claiming that the show didn't help them but failed them while putting their health at risk to manufacture dramatic television moments. One particular account came from a former guest who appeared on camera, visibly intoxicated during what was supposed to be an intervention-style episode. The guest later explained that before they started recording, they were left unsupervised in a dressing room where staff had placed bottles of vodka, Red Bull, and other drinks. There was no parental supervision or staff oversight, and they drank an entire bottle. Then they weren't sure who gave them an Xanax, telling them that it would calm their nerves. Anyone with even basic knowledge of interaction knows that mixing alcohol with Xanax can be extremely dangerous and even fatal. However, according to this guest's account, the combination was provided or at least made available by staff before they were placed in front of cameras for live audiences to watch. This guest appeared on the show so intoxicated and impaired that it would have immediately been obvious that something was seriously wrong. However, the show aired anyway, framing it as evidence of how out of control this person was, rather than acknowledging his own battles. After these allegations came forward, Phil's production team denied all responsibility, claiming that they weren't involved with what happened with the guest once they left the stage.
Next thing you know, I'm being carried onto the stage because I can barely walk.
How drunk do you think you are right now?
An entire bottle of vodka.
Keep going. 0.263.
And my dad was furious because he had just...
This suggested that any issues with guests were between them and the treatment facilities to which they were referred. They once again dodged the central accusation and moved forward to generate more dramatic content. That investigation opened more floodgates, where online forums, particularly Reddit, exploded with former guests and their families sharing stories about how the show operated. One of the accounts that went viral claimed that the show completely rewrote a mother's letter to make the family problems sound worse than they actually were. Then they edited the interview responses to get the answers that producers wanted rather than what was actually the truth. They formed a unique pattern where they prioritized dramatic content over accuracy, and manipulated situations to create conflict. Toxic workplace.
Enough to tell me who comes on here and who doesn't. Somebody has given you a really bad message.
Of course.
While guests were sharing their horror stories about their on-camera experiences, further staff members also came out and spoke about what it was like working behind the scenes. Their accounts painted a workless culture that was allegedly toxic, abusive, and controlled behind the scenes, more than the producers and Dr. Phil himself. Many former employees described an environment that was dominated by verbal abuse, intimidation, and even psychological manipulation. This is quite common, and was also seen in the case of Ellen DeGeneres, where staff were getting fired over the smallest thing. One tweet even went viral, stating that the person has worked enough with Dr. Phil and he is a narcissistic, misogynistic, chauvinistic, racist man.
I believe it was Stephanie.
Okay, let's bring Stephanie out, because I'll guarantee you she didn't tell you that I agreed to not bring somebody to this.
He even called Oprah Winfrey to get his boy. The post wasn't even an isolated complaint. It was joined by many similar accounts from other people claiming that they had witnessed something similar during their time with the show. Online communities dedicated to canceling Dr. Phil popped up, particularly on Reddit, where former staffers and guests could share experiences anonymously without the fear of retaliation. According to several accounts, staff members who raised concerns about guest welfare questioned whether certain situations were even ethical. They were marginalized, dismissed, and made the villain. The show's culture allegedly rewarded those who were willing to push boundaries and punished anyone who suggested that maybe there should be limits. Despite the controversies and criticisms, Dr. Phil's show kept running.
Dr. Phil McGraw is reportedly being sued by a former employee for false imprisonment and wrongful
The ratings started dipping to around 2 million viewers per episode. By the late 2010s, it had a 3.2 average rating, which was a significant drop from its peak years. The show remained highly profitable and continued its production. Pandemic.
So, Dr. Phil should go on hiatus for at least 2 weeks. And, frankly, we could have done that.
The pandemic changed everything. In April 2020, with COVID-19 causing unprecedented global disruption, millions of deaths, and even hospitals that were overwhelmed, entire countries went into lockdown. However, Dr. Phil appeared on Fox News and made comments that stunned even more people. He downplayed the seriousness of the pandemic by comparing it to other causes of death, saying things like 45,000 people a year die from automobile accidents and almost 500,000 from cigarettes. The comparison was factually questionable, and those numbers were, in particular, widely inflated. Medical professionals immediately called him out, but what struck observers was this. For someone who has built his entire brand on understanding human psychology and behavior, Dr. Phil was completely unable to grasp why people were terrified during the global pandemic.
I flew to the front lines of the border crisis in Eagle Pass, Texas.
Disturbing to see is when you see a small child.
Then his show didn't just dip in the ratings, it was exposed to a level where it never happened before. From there, Dr. Phil turned to politics and cultural war issues like the US-Mexico border war, where he started filming segments with Border Patrol and immigration enforcement. For longtime viewers who'd watched Dr. Phil for self-help advice, this was completely different, and he lost a big chunk of his audience from there. But Dr. Phil was all in. However, it was not enough. Ultimately, his show ended in 2023 after 21 seasons, but he didn't retire. He immediately launched Merit Street Media, describing it as the network built to fight for the soul and sanity of America. This strategy seemed smart on paper, because now he wasn't competing for shrinking daytime TV audiences, but building a dedicated platform for the country. Merit Street Media launched with huge ambitions, but by 2024, the network was reportedly destroying cash. By early 2025, layoffs were through the roof, and lawsuits started piling up. Creditors claimed that there were unpaid bills, vendors claimed breach of contracts, and the usual signs of a company in serious financial trouble. Then, in 2025, Dr. Phil and Merit Street Media filed for bankruptcy, revealing over $100 million in debt. Apparently, Merritt Street had the cost, but not the audience or the revenue to watch, and this became his demise. Just 2 weeks after Merritt Street filed for bankruptcy, Dr. Phil launched another media venture, which was built on the same concept, same positioning, but just a different name, called Invoice Media. His audacity needs to be studied. Your media company just crashed and burned $100 million in debt. Now your response is to immediately launch a new version. Rather than acknowledging failure, learning a lesson, and pivoting into something genuinely new, Dr. Phil just started hitting the hard reset and tried the same thing again. And now, instead of gracefully accepting defeat and moving on, he's launching Invoice Media and trying the exact same thing that didn't work before. From one of the most interesting shows to ever exist on the planet to failing completely yet not understanding defeat, that's the true downfall of Dr. Phil. Do you think his new business endeavor will succeed? Let us know in the comments below, and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the video.